everybody. Welcome to our virtual gardening class with Ross Meeker from the OSU Extension Office here in Ross County. Ross from Ross. And today, Ross is going to be talking to us about some things that you can be doing in your garden right now, both things that will help the plants that you have going right now, and also things that you'll want to do in preparation for fall. I know it doesn't feel anything like fall right now, does it, Ross?
Not at all, but it is time to start thinking that direction.
Great. Well, I'm going to maximize your screen so that we can see what you are going to show us. And I will keep an eye on the comments and I'll let you know if we get any questions.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. As Liz said, my name's Ross Meeker. I'm the A&R educator here in Ross County. First, I want to thank Liz and the library for having me on today. And I got to thank my wife who's playing cameraman today. So if she starts making funny faces and I lose my stuff, we'll blame her. But today we're going to talk about what we can be doing in the garden here in the middle of July, both for extending our season this year and getting better prepared for fall and even next year. It's July and it's hot and not really anybody's wanting to be out in the garden. And we've even propped up a umbrella here today so I wasn't making funny faces at you guys. So let's talk about what's going on in the garden right now. Most of us already have tomatoes out. We're probably seeing some of the first ones ripen. Zucchini should be in full force. And our cucumbers have probably been producing for a couple weeks now. But it's kind of it's the right time for us to be thinking about our fall gardens and what we can do to extend our productive season. And so as we're planning the fall, we want to look at our garden and think about what we can do to keep our areas productive. So today we have an area that we used earlier this season for radishes and cole crops. And today we're going to be transitioning those into pumpkins so that we can better use our space throughout the year. Some other things that we can be planting today, and a lot of people think it's too late to get some things started, but there are a lot of things we can do. And with our really mild falls that we've been having the past several years, we can get fresh veggies sometimes clear up through Thanksgiving. Some things you can plant today that would still work. Some late green beans. It's a good thing to start a late bush type bean or even a pole bean. We still have time to get those to maturity before a frost, and that'll allow you to phase out the older plants that will start being quick to seed and quick to maturity, so you can have young tender beans later in the season. The same is true for peas and green onions. We can start a second or third planting of those still and still have plenty of time to get that done. And it's even early enough still, if you've lost some tomato plants or pepper plants, we still have plenty of time to fill in those gaps, and we can still see some productivity out of them. It is time now to start our butter crunches and some of our lettuces if we're going to direct sow those into the garden. Although I would definitely recommend some artificial shade to protect those when they're young, to keep them from getting too tough and too pungent later in the season. As I said, when we're looking at our garden, when I'll have my wife pan around here in a few minutes, we're talking about transitioning or successional planting in our garden and keeping in mind a healthy rotation. So today we're going to plant some pumpkins, and we'll even plant some zucchinis from seed here in a day or two. But we don't want to put them where we've had other cucurbits recently, and that's just to prevent some disease handoff. So today we're going where we've had radishes and stuff, and typically those share a different group of pests than cucurbits, so we're welcome to do that in our rotation. It's also a great time to start a late season crop of beets, herbs. This is probably the last window to get another round of basil in, and that'll definitely serve you well in September when your first plantings are getting stemmy and woody and really hard to get fresh new growth off of. So if you start some now, you'll have plenty. You won't feel guilty about tearing out your old plants because you'll have fresh ones to replace them, and that will set you up for success in the fall, so that we can move those areas into a cover crop or into something that will better prepare us for the spring, instead of letting plants stay out there too long and promoting disease and making more work for us in the spring. Today, as I said, we're doing pumpkins. Cucurbits are great. If we're looking at a second planting of zucchini, I know everyone's thinking, why in the world am I planting new zucchini? I've got them coming out of my ears as it is. But if we want to think forward, we've got 60 to 90 days before zucchini planted today would be ready. And that's going to be about the time our current zucchinis are getting just too big, nasty, full of gray mold. They're growing so fast and going to seed, they're just disgusting. And if we start some new ones now, we'll have something to replace that. And so I really want to encourage people to think about a second planting of their cucurbits. That's going to include zucchinis, summer squash, and cucumber.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Ross, because I actually just planted my zucchinis. I didn't do an early planting of zucchini because I have had such trouble with squash vine borer I plant them early.
Yep.
And I've tried to plant them late to avoid that to a certain degree.
Yes, and if anyone's looking to push having those really, everyone really is after those real short, tender zucchini, and those are the ones we want. We don't want a big pod full of seeds, right? If we can even push those into the 1st of August, and we'll miss those borers, and we'll miss our stink bug damage, and we may even miss some of our gray mold and bacterial blight, because there just hasn't been we are in dry enough weather that we're not going to have that issue. So I actually encourage people to hold off planting their zucchini. We've been lucky. My oldest decided to help us plant our zucchini this year, and we have way too many and too small of an area, but they're actually looking pretty good. But my favorite thing about a midsummer planting is it's an excellent opportunity for us to teach our kids. And so when we're in the spring and there's so much work to do to get a garden in, we're prepping the ground, we're dealing with last year's residue, and we're fighting weather windows to get things in, it's hard to pause and take an opportunity to pass knowledge on to our kids. But here in July, the garden's kind of already set, and we're just doing small plantings here and there. It's a much calmer atmosphere. It's a great opportunity to pause, you teach our kids what's going on. And I love pumpkins as a introductory plant to gardening. And I have a 5-year-old who last year we let him plant his first pumpkin patch that was his. And he's eager to get over here and help us finish planting after our video this evening. So he's been bitten by the bug, and I hope he'll be a gardener the rest of his life because of it. But pumpkins are great, and July is great because things happen quickly. When we plant a pumpkin, we're talking 5 to 10 days to germination. In a 90-day variety, and I'll talk about that in a second, it's going to be ready just in time for Halloween. And what kid doesn't love a jack-o'-lantern, right? It's hard to get a kid excited about growing a tomato and a cucumber, but when it's something he's going to be able to play with and get some enjoyment beyond the kitchen, it's really a neat opportunity. I like cucurbits for introducing kids to gardening because they have really obvious life cycles, and it's a great opportunity to teach them. So when they sprout, the cotyledons are are really obvious. They're easy to point out the parts of a plant. We can see flowers, we can see bees working, we can understand the fruit developing, and explain ripening as pumpkins turn from green to orange. It's just a really neat opportunity to introduce youngsters to gardening. And so next thing I'll talk a minute about selecting things for this late of a planting. I have 2 packets of seed. I don't know where we got these. I think Menards and Central Center, between the 2 of them. But these are both pumpkins, and I want people to be conscious of what they're selecting when they're going and looking for something for this late in the season. And both of these pumpkins are similar. One's a jack-o'-lantern variety, and one is a big moon variety. These are both very old varieties. They've been around for years, and many companies have versions of each one. But you'll notice the big moon, and the big moon may come in different maturities, but this one is 110 to 120 day maturity. I think I looked this morning, I think we have 111 days until Halloween. Well, that's not going to work. But our jack-o'-lantern pumpkin is a 100-day variety. That means these guys should be ready to pick October 20th. And that's just in time to carve and sit on the porch for the week before Halloween. So we've got plenty of time to get this guy to maturity. This time of year, we want to use known varieties or varieties that show good resistance to pests and insects, because it's July and all of those things are in full force. Everything's warm and everything's active. So we want to make sure we're choosing a good variety with the proper maturity, and that's probably the most important thing for setting us up for success. Some other things we hope to plant today. My boy wanted to plant some sunflowers. This is the appropriate time to plant sunflowers. In the county, we'll see many of our commercial sunflowers being planted this week as well. Most of the time, sunflowers in Ohio follow wheat as a double crop. And so this is the right time of year to plant them in our garden, whether you're using them to beautify your property, feed the birds, or even if you want to eat them, this is the right time to be seeding sunflowers. It's a little late to start tomatoes from seed, so we'll want to be looking at those coming from transplants if you can still find them. I know with our recent stay-at-home lifestyle, the greenhouses are well picked over this year. Spinach, lettuces, and stuff, as I talked earlier, we're going to want to see. These guys are only 48 days to maturity, so in that amount of time, we'll still be in the hottest part of summer and early fall, and so they're going to need some artificial shade to protect them from the sun. That's not hard. You can find a shade screen anywhere, and you just prop it up above them, and it just cuts the amount of sun that gets to them. But that's enough about seed packs. Beets are almost foolproof as long as they're well spaced and have plenty of water. These guys are really tolerant of heat. So if you want something that's kind of easy for this type of weather, this is a good one for you guys. Challenges in July, and these are going to sound really obvious, but there's some things we can do that are important we need to go over. It's July, so water management is going to be a struggle. Heat is a problem, and pests are in full force. And so after we get our plants planted, and this is also going to apply to the rest of our garden right now, water management is probably at the top of the list. When we're watering this time of year, it's going to be really tempting to just flood the garden because it feels dry, you can see dust. Plants don't really need that. If we think about Mother Nature, that's not really how she works. So we're going to want to be diligent we're not going to want to let our soil over dry. But if roots of all plants need to have pore space to breathe, roots need roots respirate. The top of the plant performs photosynthesis and produces oxygen like everybody thinks, but the root structures of plants actually respirate like a mammal and have a carbon and oxygen exchange. So if we're overwatering, we can actually cause the plant to suffocate in the summer. And when a plant suffocates and can no longer respirate, you can have completely saturated soil and the plant will die of dehydration. It's a weird thing to think, but overwatering in Ross County is probably far more likely to kill a garden than underwatering. Rules for watering in this time of year. We need our plants to dry off during the day. And so that means we're going to want to water in the evening. If we water in the morning, we're extending the time of day it takes for that plant to dry. Every night we're having a really heavy dew, some heavy fogs, and it's taking until noon for that foliage to dry. And that's just creating an environment where fungus and the most common thing we have around here is gray mold. It's endemic, you can't escape it. But if we allow the foliage to dry and have plenty of room for ventilation, we can avoid it. Heat. Heat's our second thing we need to combat this time of year. And so when we've got little seedlings just popping up, they're really tender and they're really prone to drying out. And if we can do something to reduce the amount of sunlight getting to them when they're young, or reduce the amount of sun getting to the soil right around the bottom of them, we keep them from drying out and burning up. And if my wife will pan this way, and she doesn't need to look at me, you'll see we have strawed the edges of our garden, and right here is where we're going to plant our pumpkins in a few minutes. But notice we're using straw here, and they're twofold. One, the straw is going to help us as a mulch reduce weed sprouts. Two, it's kind of reflective. So we're reducing the amount of heat and sun collecting in the soil, which is going to reduce the stress on the plants in the middle. And once we get the pumpkins to sprout, we'll go ahead and straw up next to them to reduce that. And it'll also help retain water as we move into August. Some other things you might consider to reduce heat stress is a companion crop. If you're interested in cover cropping or companion cropping, seeding something that is fairly sparse and tall, like a cereal crop, can provide shade and not be overly competitive with pumpkins. Or if you want to use some artificial shade, like a shade net or a shade cloth, or even a trellis over top of that area until they're up and established, would really gain you some ground. A little bit more on companion crops. If anyone goes out and Googles companion crops, there's a lot of stuff out there. My advice is keep it simple. For cucurbits, which are, again, our zucchinis, cucumbers, and pumpkins, I recommend cereal crops or small seeded legumes like a white clover or a crimson clover. They're not going to crowd out the pumpkins, but they're going to get tall enough to provide some shade. And that'll keep the fruit pretty. We won't have the sun scald. We won't have the stress on the plant, and it'll slow down that transpiration and reduce the amount of water being pulled out of the soil. They can compete, so we want to keep those nice and sparse and make sure we're watering when we need to. As far as pests control, in July, preventative measures are our best. Again, select varieties that are resistant. Keep losing my place. Select varieties that are resistant. Start clean, stay clean. If you're replacing old plants, remove any sickly things from the garden so you're not passing those pathogens back and forth. I really like hybrid varieties that are a little tougher. pumpkins and watermelons, if you can find something that has been grafted, they're becoming more common. Something that's been grafted onto a rootstock, like a hard gourd. They're a lot hardier than the old traditional things. Let's see. And then just diligence. Keep up with your crops. If you start seeing something that's sickly, either get it out of there or get it treated quickly. Insects, I know in our garden today, I have seen Japanese beetles, cutworms, and we've been lucky. I think we've been too dry for aphids. I haven't seen many of them, and I haven't seen the telltale lady beetles, Asian lady beetles either. So we're pretty clean as far as insects go. Fog in Ross County has been nasty the past few days. I think that's a result of the rain and heat. And so I look for gray mold and bacterial blight of cucurbits to kind of take off very soon. If anybody sees any sickly crops, feel free to call in. I'd love to help you work through your garden and see what kind of problems we can solve together. And now, without any further ado, we'll get into planting pumpkins. It's kind of the exciting thing. And I'm only going to do one or two because my little boy wants to do a bunch, and I really want to encourage people to get their kids, or even a neighborhood kid, out with them and get them in the garden and share in both the labor and the reward, so that we can teach something. Don't just give them a pumpkin, make them come help teach or pick it or plant it and pull the weeds. All right. So I like the old school rules of thumb. We're looking at a seed. Can you guys see this on there? So the old wives' tale, Plant Farmer's Almanac things say that you should plant a seed twice as deep as the size of the seed. Well, pumpkins are very different that way from that way, right? So I would always measure my seed its largest size, right? This is a big seed. It's got a lot of energy stored in it, so it has a lot of energy to come through a lot of soil. And so I'm going to plant this guy almost 2 inches down, for a couple reasons. The top bit of the 1/4 inch of soil is the most susceptible to moisture changes and temperature changes. And so if we get them down where moisture is consistent and temperature is a little more consistent, we're going to have a much more even germination. In the spring, we worry about cold and dampening off. The soil here is 90 degrees. This guy, if he gets enough moisture, he's going to come up in 5 days. So that's not a problem. Today, what we want to be concerned with is consistent seed soil contact. Now, I don't mean run over it with a steamroller, but when you put this guy in the ground, make sure that we're firming up that soil around him so that he's not sitting in an air pocket. I want to encourage gardeners to think like commercial producers. A commercial producer is going to plant this with a corn planter. And so the first thing it's going to do is it's going to make a groove 2 inches down. Then it's going to drop the seed in. And then it's going to firm the seed. That means the seed's going to fall in the groove. Then it's going to push it down so that it's in firm contact with the bottom of the groove. And then the last thing a corn planter does is it uses 2 cast iron wheels to crumble the sides of the groove on it. Not push straight down, crumble the sides. And that prevents us from creating compaction on the side walls of our groove that would prevent roots from growing and moisture from getting to the seed. So now I'm going to walk over here and I'm going to show what I mean. Okay? So, everybody see me? Okay, so I've worked too much ground here. I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I had weeds earlier. So the only area you need to work this time of year is the very narrow band that you intend to seed. And the reason is I don't want, a pumpkin plant's going to get 10 feet around, right? That means his roots are going to go almost as far. I don't want to disturb any more ground than I have to, because that's going to encourage that ground to dry out. I only want to work the area I'm planting, so no wider than 2 or 3 inches. This particular tool might even be too wide, but it's making it easy for me, right? So, okay. Now, again, think like a commercial producer. blooper reel. Think like a commercial producer. The planter is going to come through the field and it's going to make a groove, okay, to the right depth. We said I wanted 2 inches, right? That's about 3 fingers, okay? I'm going to make a groove, being sure not to smash the sidewalls. So I wouldn't come in here with a shovel and do this, because that's smashing the sidewall, and that's an area of compaction that the root may have trouble getting through. Okay, so an even, thin slice. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, 2 inches down. All right. The next thing a commercial producer is going to be very picky about is the spacing. Pumpkins, like I said, he's going to grow about 5 feet around. Now, I want to encourage these guys to grow that direction so they can be a little closer. But I'm only going to drop them probably one every 2 feet. Okay? And because they germinate so quickly, an old school guy would have put 2 or 3 seeds there and then thinned them out. But they're going to germinate in 2 or 3 days, and I am going to be able to tell which ones I missed. So I'd rather come back later and fill in than have 3 or 4 root balls entangled and worry about injuring them as I thin them. So the next thing a commercial planter would do is they have a wheel that comes through and presses the seed in. So I want to firm that seed and make sure that it's in contact with the bottom of the trough. And then I don't want to apply pressure straight down, because then again, I'm sealing the top and preventing moisture from getting in. I want to come here and push the seed in. Okay? That way my compaction is away from the root zone and the seed is buried at that 2-inch level. Now, some people like to put their cucurbits in mounds. I do not. I'm not a prolific waterer, and if we raise that seed up, more moisture can get away from it, and it's going to require more watering. I'm kind of a lazy gardener, and occasionally I'm not as diligent as I should be, so I like them at ground level where they're with the water table of the rest of my property. Again, you know your soils better than I do. If you're in a wet situation, you may want to make a mound or a hump. But for me, I like it down low and flat. I like to make it look like a corn planter's been through the field. Do we have any questions about planting?
Well, I had a quick question about that, Ross. You mentioned that you were going to put the straw over, but do you wait until they've sprouted, or do you put the straw on top right now?
So today, we'll just do it. So I want to be able to see them come up so I can fill in if I need to. But I would want to go ahead and straw. So I worked that band. I would want to go ahead and straw up to that band. And one reason, I worked too much ground, right? I worked the whole width. And this is trying to prevent moisture loss in that area, because these roots will go out there and find moisture. I want them to be able to find all they can. But yes, I won't cover this until we are sprouted. And once we're sprouted, I'll go ahead and cover it just to conserve as much moisture and prevent as many weeds as I can.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
I think that about wraps me up for today. If anyone has any questions about getting gardens started or how to properly plant things, please feel free to give me a call at the extension office. I love puzzles and questions and pest identifications, and I can come out and help you if you need me to. So
Great. And you mentioned beets earlier. I did have a beet question, actually.
Okay.
I also planted some beets late, just a couple weeks ago. And I know that I separated the seeds, and yet now I have areas where 2 stems are coming up together. Do beets grow that way, where each seed will have multiple stems coming up?
There is a chance of having a twin. I doubt. But were your seeds coated? Did they? How did they? Let me call open these. because sometimes seeds are very tiny seeds are coated in clay, so that they're easier to handle.
Okay.
And there's a chance that 2 of them could have been in the same coating. And even if we look here, beet seeds are really funny looking, right?
Yeah, they are.
And so there's a chance, I would say more likely 2 of them got interlocked. Probably not 2 big ones like this, but probably 2 piddly ones, and they got double planted.
Okay.
For that one's sake, pick your favorite, because if 2 of them are too close, they won't do anything.
Right.
Our rule of thumb in the ag world is that a double is worse than a skip. So we're planting a cornfield or a bean field, and our tractors count every seed that goes in the ground. And we want, for instance, my corn planter drops a seed every 5.6 inches. And if there's a seed that is, I would rather miss a seed than have one at 3 inches, because when I have one at 3 inches, neither plant will produce.
Right.
So spacing's important.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you again for this presentation. Looks like you're going to have some fun with pumpkins later.
Yes. When it cools down, I'm going in.
That sounds like a good plan.
And remind everybody to be safe with the shade. I know we had our local fire department had several calls over the weekend. So heat exhaustion. So it's not fun. Be safe.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's good to be good to stay in the shade when you can. That's the nice thing about doing my garden mostly on my deck. I can be in the shade for a good part of it.
Yes. So.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you again hopefully in the fall.
Yep. Sounds like a plan.
Great.
See you guys. Now,